The fate of Patrice Lumumba is known at last. He is dead. Here seen with President Kasavubu, Prime Minister Lumumba came to power at the age of 35.
Aujourd'hui victorieux, je vous salue au nom du gouvernement congolais. À vous tous, mes amis, qui avez lutté sans relâche à nos côtés.
Congo, a land that could power the world. Its rivers, the mighty Congo River, are second only to the Amazon. Its soil brims with riches, gold, diamonds, and cobalt. This is the heart of Africa, a continent's lifeline, pulsing with untold wealth. But for 75 years, that wealth was siphoned off, not to the people of Congo, but to a tiny European kingdom thousands of miles away, Belgium. Belgium didn't just colonize Congo, it plundered it. Under King Leopold II, Congo wasn't even a colony, it was his personal property. A private estate run with the brutality of a medieval empire. Men were enslaved to harvest rubber, women were assaulted, children had their hands chopped off if production quotas weren't met. It's estimated that up to 10 million Congolese, 10 million, died during Leopold's reign of terror. And you might think, surely it got better when the Belgian government took over in 1908. Nope, it just got subtler. The whip was replaced by the pen. Congolese were forbidden from higher education, politics, or even owning property. Their country became a giant mine, a conveyor belt feeding Europe's industrial revolution, while the people who lived there were left to starve. By the 1950s, Congo was producing 70% of the world's uranium. Yes, the same uranium used in the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And yet, Congolese families lived in mud huts without running water or electricity. This wasn't just inequality, it was theft, and it couldn't last forever. But June 30th, 1960 changed everything, or so it seemed.
Du Congo constitue l'aboutissement de l'œuvre conçue par le génie du roi Léopold II, entreprise par lui avec un courage tenace.
Belgium thought they could choreograph Congo's independence, a stage-managed ceremony where they'd hand over power while keeping all the strings. But Lumumba, he had other plans. He wasn't going to let them rewrite history. It was like someone threw a grenade into the room, powerful, necessary, but dangerous. In just 6 minutes, Lumumba tore down Belgium's carefully crafted facade of benevolence. He called out the atrocities. He spoke to the pain of his people. And he dared to dream of a Congo that was truly free. Free from colonialism, free from exploitation, free from foreign interference. But not everyone cheered. Lumumba's speech sent shockwaves through the Western world. To Belgium, it was an insult. To the CIA, it was a red flag. And to some in his own government, it was a risk they couldn't afford. To understand why Lumumba's words were so dangerous, you have to understand the timing. This was 1960, the height of the Cold War. The United States wasn't just fighting communism, it was obsessed with stopping it everywhere. And when Lumumba turned to the Soviet Union for help, the CIA didn't see a desperate leader, they saw a puppet of Moscow. Lumumba's dream of freedom clashed with a brutal reality. Congo's independence wasn't just about Congo. It was a chessboard in a global game of power, and Lumumba, he was the king they were willing to sacrifice. Patrice Lumumba wasn't born into power, far from it. He came from Onalua, a small village tucked away in the Kasai region of Congo. His family was part of the Tetela ethnic group, a community marginalized and overlooked by the colonial elite. Life in Onalua was simple, farming, fishing, and storytelling by the fire at night. But even as a boy, Lumumba was different. He didn't just listen to the stories, he questioned them. Where did the chief's power come from? Why did Belgians control the land? And why was Congo's wealth enriching a country he had never seen? Lumumba's brilliance couldn't be contained. He was sharp, curious, and relentless in his pursuit of knowledge. At a time when the Belgian colonial system offered education only to a select few Congolese, Lumumba pushed his way through, eventually earning a spot at a Catholic mission school. But even there, the inequality was glaring. White Belgian students had better facilities, better teachers, and better prospects. For Congolese students like Lumumba, the glass ceiling was always there. When Lumumba moved to the city, the injustices of colonial rule became impossible to ignore. White-only schools, segregated train cars, Belgian bosses treating Congolese workers like dirt. Stanleyville wasn't just a city, it was a microcosm of the colonial machine, a place where the wealth of Congo was extracted, processed, and shipped out, leaving its people with nothing. Lumumba landed a job as a postal clerk, a coveted position for a Congolese man at the time, but the colonial administration underestimated him. They saw a quiet clerk. What they missed was a revolutionary in the making. By night, Lumumba organized meetings, read voraciously, and began to hone his superpower: words. Words that could cut through centuries of division and unite people who had been taught to distrust each other. Lumumba's talent wasn't just his intelligence, it was his ability to inspire. He didn't just talk about independence, he painted a picture of it. A Congo where tribes weren't pitted against each other, where the wealth of the land was shared by all, and where dignity was restored to its people. It was radical. Up until then, most Congolese political movements had been local, focused on specific tribes or regions. But Lumumba had a vision that was bigger than that. He wanted a united Congo, a nation that would stand as a beacon of African independence. But being brilliant wasn't enough. Colonial powers don't hand over freedom because you ask nicely. They do it because they're forced to. In 1956, Lumumba's growing influence landed him in trouble. He was arrested on charges of embezzlement, a thinly veiled attempt to silence him. But prison didn't break him. If anything, it made him stronger. By the time he was released, he wasn't just a local leader. He was a national symbol of resistance. Lumumba's ability to unite people wasn't just about speeches. It was about strategy. He brought together leaders from across Congo's fractured political landscape, building the foundation for the Mouvement National Congolais, MNC, a political party that wasn't tied to a single tribe or region. It was bold, it was ambitious, and it put Lumumba on a collision course with Belgium. By the late 1950s, the winds of change were sweeping across Africa. Ghana had gained independence in 1957, and movements in Algeria, Kenya, and South Africa were gaining momentum. Belgium knew it couldn't hold on to Congo forever, but it wanted to control the transition. Lumumba, he wanted freedom on his terms. Lumumba wasn't just fighting for independence, he was fighting for dignity, for a Congo that wasn't just free in name, but free in reality. And that made him dangerous to Belgium, to Western powers, and even to some of his own countrymen. June 30th, 1960. Congo, a nation plundered for decades, finally declared its independence. The streets were alive with hope, the air thick with possibility. But beneath the surface of the celebration, there was a problem, a big one. Belgium hadn't just handed over power, it had rigged the system before leaving. Sure, Congo had a flag and a national anthem, but the real levers of control, the military, the economy, and the bureaucracy, were still firmly in Belgian hands. Independence was a ceremony, not a reality. Here's the thing. Belgium left behind more than statues. They left a trap. Congo's military, for example, was still run by Belgian officers. The rank-and-file soldiers, who were Congolese, quickly realized that while their country was now independent, their pay, promotions, and conditions hadn't changed. And when soldiers rebelled against their Belgian officers, all hell broke loose. Lumumba tried to bring order to the madness. His solution? He appointed Joseph Mobutu, a young, ambitious officer from his own tribe, as the new army chief. It seemed like a smart move at the time. But Mobutu? He was playing a long game of his own. If Congo's independence was a trap, Katanga was the trigger. Katanga, a mineral-rich province, wasn't just valuable, it was essential. Its gold, copper, and uranium were the backbone of Congo's economy. And Belgium? They weren't ready to let it go. Just days after independence, Katanga declared itself a separate state, backed by Belgian interests. It wasn't just a political crisis, it was an economic one. Without Katanga, Congo was crippled. And Lumumba, he knew it was sabotage. Here's where things get tricky. Lumumba didn't have time to play nice. Congo was in chaos, and the Western powers weren't helping. So, when Belgium and the United Nations refused to intervene in Katanga, Lumumba turned to the Soviet Union. It wasn't ideological, it was pragmatic. He needed support, and the Soviets were willing to provide it. But this wasn't just a local crisis anymore. The Cold War had turned Congo into a chessboard. To the United States and its allies, Lumumba's partnership with the Soviets wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war. In less than 3 months, Lumumba went from a hero of independence to a man surrounded by enemies. Belgium wanted him gone. The CIA saw him as a Soviet puppet. Even some of his own ministers turned against him, and Mobutu. He was quietly aligning himself with the West. The CIA had made up its mind. Lumumba wasn't just an obstacle, he was a threat. And in the Cold War, threats didn't last long. Independence had been won, but freedom? That was slipping away. Lumumba didn't know it yet, but the forces conspiring against him were closing in, and they wouldn't stop until he was gone. In Washington, Patrice Lumumba wasn't seen as a visionary or a liberator. He was a problem, a communist puppet threatening to tilt Congo and its immense wealth into the Soviet orbit. And during the Cold War, problems like Lumumba didn't last long. A quote from a CIA memo, declassified in the 1990s. "We must consider the possibility of Lumumba's removal. His continued influence is inimical to the interests of the free world." The CIA wasn't subtle. They openly discussed assassination, a word whispered across boardrooms and stamped on classified documents. But they weren't the only ones plotting. For Belgium, Lumumba's vision of a united Congo was a nightmare. Why? One word: Katanga. This southern province wasn't just rich, it was vital. Its mines held gold, copper, and uranium. In fact, the uranium used in the Manhattan Project bombs that leveled Hiroshima and Nagasaki came from Katanga. Moise Tshombe, leader of Katanga, announced Katanga's secession on television. He stated that Katanga declares its independence to safeguard its prosperity and protect its people. Protect its people? More like protect Belgian business interests. Katanga's secession wasn't just a rebellion. It was a deal. Tshombe got political backing, and Belgium kept access to its mines. And Lumumba? He was caught in the middle, fighting a war on two fronts. And then there was Mobutu, Lumumba's hand-picked army chief, the man who was supposed to help him unite Congo. But Mobutu had ambitions of his own. And when the CIA came knocking, with briefcases of cash and promises of power, he didn't hesitate. The CIA funneled money to Mobutu, funding his rise as Congo's new strongman. The plan was simple. Lumumba had to go. And with Mobutu's troops in control, the coup was set in motion. Lumumba was arrested in December 1960. His crime? Daring to dream of a Congo free from foreign control. But his captors weren't just local. The CIA and Belgian agents orchestrated every step of his downfall. Mobutu painted himself as Congo's savior, the man who would restore order and protect Congo from the Soviet threat. But what he really did was pave the way for Lumumba's execution. Congo's brightest light was about to be extinguished, not in battle, but in cold blood. The coup was over, the conspiracy was complete, and for Lumumba, there was no way back. January 17th, 1961. Patrice Lumumba's journey into the abyss begins, betrayed by his own government, delivered to his enemies, and now on a one-way trip to Katanga, the land of secessionists and mercenaries backed by Belgian greed. In Katanga, Lumumba was handed over to his executioners. Belgian officers and Katangan officials, orchestrating every detail, weren't content with just silencing him. They needed to erase him. The forest in Katanga would become their final resting place. Under the cover of darkness, Lumumba and his allies were tortured, mocked, and then lined up before a firing squad. Belgian officers stood by, overseeing the entire operation like foremen on a factory floor. But their killers didn't stop there. This wasn't just about murder, it was about obliteration. A haunting detail emerges. Belgian operatives dismantling Lumumba's body piece by piece, then dissolving it in acid. A chilling confession from Belgian officer Gerard Soete. He is quoted as saying, "We had to make him disappear. Completely." The acid worked well. Their goal was simple: erase every trace of Lumumba so no martyr's grave could spark a revolution. But in trying to destroy his legacy, they made it immortal. For years, Belgium denied everything. No involvement, no knowledge, just an unfortunate series of events. But secrets don't stay buried forever. By the 1990s, declassified documents and confessions painted a damning picture. Belgium didn't just have blood on its hands, it had written the playbook. And they weren't alone. The CIA and MI6 had their fingerprints all over the plot, viewing Lumumba's death as a win for the free world. But was it? Killing Lumumba didn't kill his dream. It made him a symbol, a rallying cry for oppressed nations. His vision of a united, independent Africa burned brighter in death than it ever could in life. Lumumba's death was meant to be the end of his story. But in the ashes of that forest clearing, something extraordinary happened. His dream survived. It inspired revolutions, shaped movements, and haunted the very powers that tried to silence him. Patrice Lumumba's story didn't end in 1961. If anything, his death was just the beginning. Today, Lumumba's name is invoked in protests, his face a symbol of unfulfilled promises. In Kinshasa, Goma, and beyond, his vision of a united and independent Congo still resonates. But look closer, and you'll see the scars of the battles he never got to finish. Lumumba's impact wasn't confined to Congo. He became a global icon of resistance. In Harlem, his image stood as a rallying cry during the civil rights movement. In Latin America, revolutionaries quoted his speeches. And across Africa, leaders like Nelson Mandela and Thomas Sankara drew inspiration from his struggle. Even in the unlikeliest places, Lumumba's legacy endures. A statue of him stands in Moscow, a reminder of his brief but pivotal alignment with the Soviet Union. To the world, he wasn't just a leader, he was a symbol of what could have been. But what about Congo today? The dream Lumumba fought for, of a free and united nation, is still elusive. Decades of dictatorship, corruption, and foreign interference have left the country in chaos. And the mining interests that got Lumumba killed, they're stronger than ever. Cobalt and coltan, the lifeblood of our smartphones and electric cars, are extracted from Congo, often under horrific conditions. The wealth still flows out, just like it did under Belgian rule. Only now, it's masked by the veneer of modern capitalism. Every protest, every call for change in Congo carries echoes of Lumumba, but his dream of a united Congo is constantly at odds with the reality of neo-colonialism and internal betrayal. Even Lumumba's family has carried his legacy into global forums, demanding accountability for his assassination and the continued exploitation of their homeland. Yet, Congo's politics remain as fractured as ever, divided between regional factions, tribal loyalties, and the influence of foreign powers. So here's the question. Was Lumumba naive? Did he underestimate the forces stacked against him? Or was he simply too bold for a world that wasn't ready for his vision of a truly independent Africa? History has spoken, but the story isn't over. Lumumba's legacy is both an inspiration and a cautionary tale, a reminder that the fight for freedom is long, messy, and often unfinished. For Congo, for Africa, and for the world, his dream remains a challenge. Will we rise to meet it? I hope you found the story of Patrice Lumumba interesting, but if you want an even more controversial piece of African history, go check out this video right here. I'll see you there in a second.